The mainstream asks whether Trump can force Iran back into an agreement. That is the wrong question. The deeper question is this: what does a nuclear deal mean if the most important material cannot be fully accounted for? Because a peace deal is paper, a ceasefire is language, a diplomatic statement is theater, but enriched uranium is physical reality. It exists somewhere or it does not. It has been moved or it has not. It has been diluted or it has not. It has been destroyed or it has not. It is under inspection or it is outside inspection. And until that question is answered, every promise in the deal rests on a hole in the map. This is not theater, this is mathematics. A nuclear agreement does not run on trust. It runs on verification. It runs on inspectors. It runs on cameras. It runs on seals. It runs on declared stockpiles, measured enrichment levels, monitored centrifuges, access to facilities, continuity of knowledge, and the ability of outside observers to say with confidence that the material has not vanished into a place where diplomacy cannot reach it. That is the entire architecture. Without verification, a nuclear deal becomes a political performance. With verification, it can become a strategic instrument. And right now, the most dangerous question in the Iran crisis is not what Tehran says. It is what inspectors can no longer see. Reuters has reported that the United States circulated a draft resolution at the IAEA demanding that Iran provide detailed information about bombed nuclear sites and enriched uranium stocks. That report also highlighted concern over Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched up to 60%, including a reported 440.9 kilograms, material that could be further enriched if Iran chose that path. That number matters, not because numbers alone create weapons, not because a stockpile automatically becomes a bomb, not because Iran's public position should be ignored when it says its nuclear program is not for weapons, but because in nuclear strategy, uncertainty itself becomes power. If Washington does not know where the material is, Tehran has leverage. If inspectors cannot verify the status of bombed sites, Tehran has ambiguity. If the United States demands removal and Iran refuses, Tehran has a bargaining chip. If Trump wants a deal before the uranium question is solved, then the deal itself becomes vulnerable to the one question nobody can afford to leave unanswered. Where is it? That is the hidden problem. Trump wants an Iran deal. Iran wants survival, sanctions relief, deterrence, and strategic space. Israel wants assurance that Iran cannot rebuild or reconstitute a nuclear capability. The IAEA wants access. Russia and China want to prevent the West from turning the nuclear file into another pressure campaign, and the region wants the war to stop. But beneath all of those visible demands sits the physical question: the uranium. This is why Washington's real fear is not simply missiles. Missiles can be tracked, launch sites can be struck, air defense systems can be deployed, naval assets can move, bases can be reinforced, drones can be intercepted. But uranium is different. Uranium is patient. It does not need to be launched tonight. It does not need to be announced. It does not need to move visibly across the sky. It can sit in a facility, a tunnel, a protected storage site, an underground complex, a sealed container, or a place inspectors have not accessed. And as long as its status remains uncertain, it silently rewrites every negotiation. The silence is the signal. Now understand the first mistake. Washington often treats nuclear diplomacy as a matter of pressure. Pressure Iran enough and Iran will sign. Sanction Iran enough and Iran will compromise. Strike Iran enough and Iran will accept limits. Threaten Iran enough and Iran will surrender the most dangerous parts of its program. But nuclear material changes the logic. Because once a state possesses enriched uranium, especially at higher levels of enrichment, the negotiation is no longer only about future behavior. It is about existing capability. That is a different problem. Stopping a future program is one thing. Accounting for existing material is another. If the material is known, monitored, sealed, diluted, exported, or destroyed, then diplomacy has a physical foundation. If the material is uncertain, then diplomacy becomes a gamble. That is the problem Trump faces. He may be able to announce progress. He may be able to claim Iran agreed to no nuclear weapons. He may be able to say sanctions will remain until the final deal. He may be able to insist that Tehran has no choice, but none of that answers the question that matters most. Can the United States and the IAEA verify the uranium? Because if they cannot, then Trump's deal has a hidden weakness at its center: a missing map. Phase 1 is the verification phase. This is where every serious nuclear agreement either becomes real or becomes theater. Verification is not a symbolic demand. It is the mechanism that separates diplomacy from illusion. Inspectors must know what facilities exist. They must know what material exists. They must know what enrichment levels exist. They must know what was damaged, what survived, what was moved, and what remains accessible. The IAEA has warned about the loss of continuity of knowledge when it cannot track nuclear material and activities over time. Reuters reported that the agency has had trouble accessing bombed Iranian sites and confirming the status of enriched uranium, creating exactly the kind of verification gap that nuclear diplomacy is designed to prevent. That phrase, continuity of knowledge, sounds technical. It is not technical. It is existential. It means the chain of certainty has been broken. And when the chain of certainty breaks in a nuclear file, every actor begins making worst-case assumptions. Israel assumes Iran retained more than it admits. Washington assumes Tehran is hiding leverage. Tehran assumes inspectors are being used to prepare future strikes. Russia and China assume the West is building a legal pretext. The Gulf assumes another war may be one report away. And Trump assumes he can force a deal before the uncertainty consumes the diplomacy. That is the trap. Verification is supposed to reduce mistrust. But after strikes, damaged facilities, restricted access, and political hardening, verification itself becomes the battlefield. Iran says it needs protection from future attacks. America says it needs proof. Israel says proof is not enough unless the capability is removed. The IAEA says access is necessary. Tehran says sovereignty is necessary. And the uranium waits inside the argument, not speaking, not moving, but controlling everything. Phase 2 is the leverage phase. This is where the uranium stops being only nuclear material and becomes a bargaining instrument. Iran understands something very clearly. If it gives up the uranium too early, it gives up leverage. If it ships it abroad, it may never get it back. If it dilutes it, it reduces the one pressure point Washington and Israel fear most. If it allows full inspection without security guarantees, it may expose sites and supply chains to future attack. From Tehran's perspective, the uranium is not merely material, it is insurance. Insurance against regime change fantasies, insurance against another strike campaign, insurance against a deal that lifts sanctions temporarily and then collapses under political pressure, insurance against the lesson Iran believes it learned from previous agreements, that concessions can be reversible for America, but irreversible for Iran. That is why enriched uranium is the strongest card in the talks. Reuters reported that Iran's highly enriched uranium has become a major point of contention in nuclear discussions, with the United States demanding that uranium enriched to 60% be destroyed or otherwise neutralized, while Iran denies seeking nuclear weapons. This is the heart of the deal. Not the speeches, not the handshakes, not the headlines, the material, because as long as Iran holds the material, it holds potential. Not certainty. Potential. And potential is enough to reshape negotiations. A country does not need to build a weapon tomorrow for its adversaries to fear that it could move closer to one later. A stockpile is not a bomb, but in a crisis, a stockpile can become a clock, and every side hears that clock differently. Washington hears urgency, Israel hears danger, Iran hears deterrence, Russia and China hear leverage against Western pressure, the Gulf hears risk, markets hear instability. That is why this issue cannot be solved through language alone. You cannot negotiate away uncertainty if the physical material remains outside clear verification. Phase 3 is the deal-breaker phase. This is where Trump's political problem becomes strategic. A successful Iran deal requires Trump to show strength. He must show that Iran did not outmaneuver him. He must show that sanctions were not lifted for nothing. He must show that Israel's security concerns were addressed. He must show that the nuclear file is not simply being pushed into the future. He must show that America's strikes, threats, and pressure produce something measurable. But Iran also must show strength. Tehran must show that it did not surrender. It must show that its nuclear rights were not erased. It must show that its sovereignty survived. It must show that the war did not force unconditional submission. It must show that its bargaining chips were not handed over without compensation. That means both sides need a deal, but both sides also need to avoid looking defeated by the deal. This is where the uranium becomes explosive. If Trump accepts a deal without full verification, his critics will say Iran kept the most dangerous card. If Iran accepts a deal that removes all high-enriched material without guarantees, hardliners will say Tehran surrendered its deterrent. If the IAEA cannot confirm the stockpile, Israel will not trust the agreement. If Israel does not trust the agreement, the ceasefire remains fragile. If the ceasefire remains fragile, the deal becomes vulnerable to one incident, one leak, one inspection dispute, one accusation, one strike. This is how nuclear diplomacy collapses, not always because nobody wanted a deal, but because the deal cannot carry the weight of what remains unresolved. And right now, the unresolved issue is not abstract. It is measurable. It is physical. It is uranium. Now consider the historical lesson. The world has seen nuclear agreements before. The arms control architecture of the Cold War did not survive because the United States and Soviet Union trusted each other. It survived when verification made cheating harder, slower, more detectable, and more politically costly. Trust was never the foundation. Verification was. The same principle applied to earlier Iran nuclear diplomacy. Limits mattered because inspectors could check them. Stockpile reductions mattered because material could be measured. Centrifuge limits mattered because facilities could be monitored. Enrichment caps mattered because samples and cameras and access created a chain of knowledge. But when war enters the nuclear file, the chain weakens. Bombed sites create access disputes. Strikes create security fears. Sanctions create bargaining pressure. National pride creates red lines. And every damaged facility becomes both evidence and mystery. What was destroyed? What survived? What was moved before the strike? What can inspectors still access? What can no longer be verified? These questions matter more than any speech, because nuclear deals are not judged by promises. They are judged by what can be proved. That is why the uranium question is so dangerous for Trump. He can pressure Iran, he can threaten Iran, he can claim progress, he can refuse to unfreeze assets before a deal is done, he can demand no nuclear weapons. But if the uranium file remains unresolved, the deal remains haunted. Haunted by the possibility that the most dangerous part of the program survived the war. Haunted by the possibility that Tehran retained the strongest card. Haunted by the possibility that inspectors are being asked to certify a map with missing territory. Haunted by the possibility that the next crisis begins not because Iran launches a missile, but because an inspector cannot confirm what Washington promised had been contained. This is the real fear. Not that a deal fails publicly, but that it succeeds politically while failing strategically. A deal can be announced, sanctions can be discussed, negotiators can shake hands, markets can calm, leaders can claim victory. But if the verification problem remains buried underneath the ceremony, the crisis has not ended. It has only moved underground. And underground is where nuclear uncertainty becomes most dangerous. Now let us address the obvious objection. Some will say Iran has not built a nuclear weapon. That is important. Some will say enriched uranium is not the same as a bomb. That is true. Some will say Iran maintains its program as peaceful. That is also true. Some will say the West has exaggerated Iranian threats before. That must be acknowledged. But serious analysis does not require exaggeration. It requires understanding the difference between weaponization and leverage. Iran does not need to test a bomb for the uranium stockpile to matter. It does not need to declare a weapon for the stockpile to reshape diplomacy. It does not need to cross the final line for adversaries to fear that the line is getting easier to cross. The danger is not certainty. The danger is uncertainty combined with capability. That is why the IAEA matters. That is why access matters. That is why inspectors matter. That is why stockpile accounting matters. That is why bombed sites matter. And that is why the phrase, "the uranium is missing," is so politically powerful. It does not have to mean literally vanished forever. It means unverified, unaccounted for, outside clear visibility, no longer inside the chain of certainty that makes a nuclear deal credible. And in diplomacy, sometimes unverified is almost as destabilizing as missing, because every side fills the gap with fear. Israel fills it with threat assessments. Washington fills it with pressure. Iran fills it with sovereignty claims. Russia and China fill it with warnings against escalation. Markets fill it with risk. And the region fills it with dread. Now, what is the American answer? More resolutions? More sanctions? More threats? More negotiations? More inspection demands? All of those tools may matter, but none of them solve the central contradiction. America wants Iran to give up leverage before trusting Iran. Iran wants America to provide guarantees before giving up leverage. That is the entire problem. Washington says, show us the uranium, then we talk about relief. Tehran says, give us protection and relief, then we talk about the uranium. Israel says, remove the capability first. The IAEA says, access first. Russia and China say, stop turning inspections into pressure. Each actor has a different sequence. And in nuclear diplomacy, sequence is destiny. Do inspections come before sanctions relief? Does uranium dilution proliferation come before security guarantees? Does access to bombed sites come before a ceasefire extension? Does Iran admit where everything is before America promises not to strike again? Does Trump unfreeze assets only after full compliance? Or does Iran refuse full compliance until assets move? This is how talks fail, not because the final goal is impossible, but because the first step is unacceptable to someone. That is why the uranium question is the hidden problem inside Trump's deal. It is not just technical, it is sequencing, it is leverage, it is sovereignty, it is verification, it is deterrence, it is political survival on both sides, and it is the one issue that cannot be solved by a dramatic headline. Now imagine the next phase. Negotiators meet, statements are careful, both sides say progress is possible. Trump says Iran will not have nuclear weapons. Tehran says its rights must be respected. Inspectors ask for access. Iran demands protocols. Israel warns that time is running out. Congress demands details. Russia and China oppose pressure. Oil markets watch the Gulf. And somewhere inside the center of all of this is the material that determines whether the agreement is real. That is the core of the script. A deal is not real because leaders announce it. A deal is real when the material obeys it. The centrifuges, the stockpile, the enrichment level, the seals, the cameras, the access, the chain of knowledge. Without that, a nuclear deal becomes a photograph. With that, it becomes a system. And Trump's challenge is that systems are harder to build than headlines. This is why the current crisis is so dangerous. The political incentive is to announce progress quickly. The strategic requirement is to verify slowly. Those two timelines are in conflict. Trump needs a win. Iran needs leverage. Israel needs certainty. The IAEA needs access. The region needs calm. But nuclear verification does not move at the speed of political theater. It moves at the speed of evidence. And evidence is exactly what is hardest to produce after a war, after bombings, after mistrust, after blocked inspections, after competing narratives, after every actor has learned to treat transparency as vulnerability. This is the final trap. The same strikes that were supposed to weaken Iran's nuclear program may have made verification harder. The same pressure that was supposed to force a deal may have made Tehran more determined to hold its strongest card. The same political urgency that pushes Trump toward an agreement may make the uranium question more dangerous if it is not solved first. That is the paradox. America may have damaged facilities, but damage is not the same as knowledge. America may have pressured Tehran, but pressure is not the same as control. America may get a deal, but a deal is not the same as verification. And without verification, the deal may contain the seed of the next crisis. Capability is not inevitability. Iran may compromise. Inspectors may regain access. The stockpile may be accounted for. A formula may be found: dilution, export, monitored storage, phased sanctions relief, security assurances, or some combination that allows both sides to claim victory without leaving the nuclear file in darkness. That is possible. But capabilities carefully built do not disappear. Stockpiles do not stop mattering because negotiators meet. Facilities do not become transparent because leaders speak optimistically, and uncertainty does not vanish because a deal is politically useful. It waits. It waits inside the missing inventory. It waits inside the unverified site. It waits inside the question inspectors cannot yet answer. It waits inside the gap between what Trump wants to announce and what the IAEA can prove. That is why the uranium matters. Not because it guarantees war, but because it prevents peace from becoming simple. So the real question is not whether Trump can get Iran to sign a deal. The real question is whether he can get a deal that survives the uranium question. Because if the material remains unverified, then the crisis has not ended. It has only been postponed. And the next war may not begin with fire and thunder. It may begin with a report, a missing number, a denied inspection, a stockpile no one can fully locate, a sentence buried inside an IAEA document that tells the world the deal was never as solid as it looked. What do you think? Is Trump's Iran deal moving toward real peace? Or is the uranium question the hidden problem that could break everything? Share your perspective in the comments. Because this is not only about Iran, it is not only about Trump, it is not only about one deal. It is about whether modern diplomacy can still control nuclear reality once the chain of verification has been broken.